And with just 5 days until the election day, the Trump and Biden campaigns are making their last-minute pitches to voters. The two candidates both holding rallies in Florida today as they compete for battleground states. Joining us now is Steve Cortes, who is the senior advisor for the Trump 2020 campaign. Thanks for taking the time here on the day. I want to start things off with what I've seen you tweeting about already, the GDP report. We've seen the largest quarterly jump after the largest quarterly decline. What plan does the president look to activate in order to ensure that we're getting the economy back to pre-COVID levels?
Right. Well, listen, just absolutely astounding news for our country. Certainly good news also for our campaign today, that the economy roars back to life in America. And this is hardly an isolated number, by the way. Just 2 days ago, we got durable goods report out, and durable goods are goods that are not consumed immediately, things like appliances and electronics and furniture. And that report reached new highs for the Trump presidency, got back all of the pandemic losses and then some. So this is an economy that is clearly on the move, that is marching higher. We love the trajectory of it. And our closing argument with the American people is that President Trump built an incredible era of prosperity once, and he's now doing it again for a second time. And the way to continue and accelerate that trend, that economic renaissance in this country, is to rehire Donald Trump as our national CEO. And we also want to point out our opponent and his plans. He wants the largest tax hike in American history, $4 trillion, twice as big as anything that even Hillary Clinton had proposed. And he would represent a retreat backward to a place of economic submission to China. So we don't want to go there. We know that this president, our entrepreneur in chief, has the record of producing the conditions for prosperity, again, not just once, but now twice in real time.
A question of who that prosperity was going to in the TCJA in 2017. Some of the criticisms have been that a lot of the tax cuts went to major corporations and a lot of the executives instead of necessarily going directly to American taxpayers. And so how would you, going into this next term, how would President Trump make sure that the average American who is struggling right now in many parts of the American economy, you're still seeing deep declines in terms of the unemployment, especially with another wave of the COVID pandemic set to impact the economy?
You know, I'm glad you asked this, because during the first 3 years of the Trump term, in fact, the greatest gains went to blue collar folks, to working class people. The data is very clear on this. 2019 was the best income year by a mile in all of U.S. history, 6.8% overall income growth, largely because of the 2017 tax cuts. But blue collar workers saw even better than that. They saw 9% wage growth. Blacks and Hispanics saw 7.1% wage growth. So everybody did well, from the most well-off to the most modest earner. But the point is, the economic underdogs, the strivers, did the best. They leaped to the lead of gains. And we can't just brag about what happened in the past. So we know that the tax cuts were terrific at creating prosperity for working class people. But we're also doing it again right now. We just got out a terrific jobs report for September. We've added 11.4 million jobs back to the economy over the last 4 months. But I think some of the best news within that report is that workers who work in factories, manufacturing average hourly earnings hit an all-time high. They are now up 11.2% during the Trump presidency, including all the challenges of the China virus. And that pace, by the way, for these 4 years, if we compare it to Joe Biden, to his time in the White House, the slow growth, sluggish Obama-Biden expansion, it is 50% better than factory workers saw during their years. They lost, when he was vice president, they lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs in the United States. They told us that they could only come back with a, quote, magic wand. Well, Donald Trump doesn't have a magic wand, but he does have the right policy prescription of lower taxes, restrained regulation, and toughness in trade. That produced 500,000 manufacturing jobs added back in the first 3 years of this administration. So we are a movement for workers, and he is the president for prosperity for working class people.
And Steve, I'd appreciate for the rest of the segment if we could stay away from any xenophobic statements like China virus. Of course, we've been trying to destigmatize
There's nothing
this virus.
There's nothing xenophobic about describing where a virus came from. Ebola is named after a river. The German measles are obviously named after Germany. There's nothing xenophobic about calling it a China virus. It's also important for us to highlight that
How
this
does
virus
it not
is not
further stigmatize the virus in the U.S., though, when you've had attacks on Asian Americans?
I'm unaware of any attacks on Asian Americans, but describing where something comes from, by definition, is not xenophobic, okay? It just isn't. If I call someone a Mexican national and he's from Mexico, there's nothing xenophobic about that. It is the China virus. And one of the reasons it's clear to be apt and correct, I won't play word games, to be apt and correct about it, is that we need to make sure that the American people realize that this virus is not Donald Trump's fault. It's not Joe Biden's fault. It's not any American's fault. Only the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party, the ruling class of China, they deserve complete blame for this virus because they lied to the world. They obfuscated, and through their deception and malfeasance, a virus that very likely could have been contained to Wuhan itself and could have had probably very small damage. Instead, they knowingly infected the entire globe, and they bear responsibility for it.
Do you see this as an act of terror if you think that they knowingly did so?
Oh, I don't think so. We absolutely know that they knew that they had human-to-human transmission.
So
Again,
you would call it an act of terror in that?
I don't know if it's an act of terror, but it's an incredibly reprehensible act. They knew that there was human-to-human transition. We know this now. This is factual. This is a conspiracy theory. This is on the record. I mean, Pompeo's talked about this many times, our National Security Advisor O'Brien. They knew, at least in December, perhaps even earlier, that they had human-to-human transmission in Wuhan. They lied to the world. They got the World Health Organization to give a medical stamp of approval to their lie, and they protected the rest of China from Wuhan. That is, by the way, to me, the most reprehensible part of this whole saga of what the CCP did to the world. So they protected Beijing and Shanghai. You couldn't travel from Wuhan to those places, but you could travel from Wuhan to Milan, to New York, and thousands and thousands of citizens of Wuhan did. They were unwittingly, it wasn't their fault, they were unwittingly becoming seeds to infect the entire globe. So yes, China absolutely made a conscious and willful decision to infect the globe and crash the global economy.
We got to move on because we got a few other topics that I got to hit on real quick. First, coming back to this GDP report, state and local government spending fell 3.3% while continuing to battle pandemic-related costs, small business shutdowns, without additional federal aid and another wave of the virus, which we mentioned with new highs. President Trump tweeted on September 11th that Pelosi and Schumer want trillions of dollars of bailout money for blue states that are doing badly, both economically in terms of high crime, as a condition to making a deal on stimulus, but the USA is coming back strong. I want to know, what assurance do Americans have that President Trump will represent the interests of all Americans, not just the red states or the blue states, but the United States if elected to a second term?
Well, the easiest way to do that is to not make it geographic in any sense. What the president really wants is the majority of the relief aid, and he does want relief aid. Unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi simply refuses to negotiate in good faith. She's playing pandemic politics. What he wants to do is give industries that are still struggling, that are going to have a hard time coming back for systemic reasons because of the lockdown, industries like, for instance, cruise ships, that they will get particular aid, the airlines as well, a lot of travel-related ones, and then also individual aid, just actual checks for Americans who are still out of work through no fault of their own, who are anxious to get back to work. So again, rather than making it regional or geographic in any sense, we should be targeting people, American citizens who are out of work, wherever they live, doesn't matter, and then American industries, wherever they are. What the president will not agree to, though, is what Nancy Pelosi was trying to insert into the bill, were effectively bailouts of profligate states. States like my own Illinois, which has been incredibly irresponsible for many years, and Illinois' governor was requesting, and with the cooperation of Nancy Pelosi, effectively trying to use the pandemic as a beard to get assistance for years and years of fiscal lack of discipline, total lack of discipline in those states. And the president is holding the line on that score.
Steve, just while we have you lastly here, the trust of a vaccine efficacy, it's deteriorated over the past few months. We've seen this in the polls and some data as well. Poll results from Axios, NBC, ABC, they each show a wide credibility gap, President Trump specifically on vaccine safety. And so a healthy population means a healthy economy, as we had been talking about earlier. What would Trump do in his second term to insert confidence into the vaccine development process and also the approved candidates, and the broader rollout and distribution?
Well, I think it's really unfortunate that there is skepticism about the vaccine, and I would put all of that blame at the feet of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's really detestable.
Joe Biden's not president right now, though.
Right, but they have a massive platform, obviously, as the Democratic nominee for president and vice president. And they have continued to cast doubt on vaccines. They have been totally anti-science, and they have been, again, playing the worst kind of pandemic politics. Vaccines are not developed by President Trump.
What would President Trump do, is the question.
Well, hold on. I will answer that. Nor will it be approved by President Trump. That's not how vaccines work. He's not a scientist. He's not at the FDA. He does not approve these. Scientists are doing that, and they tell us, by the way, that we're at the threshold of getting it done with absolutely amazing speed, largely because of President Trump's leadership. But what he will do is make sure that he messages, once he's reelected, to the American people about exactly how the vaccine process works. We believe once the American people are educated on that, and once we no longer have Joe Biden out there as a Democratic nominee casting doubt constantly upon vaccines, something that could literally cost lives in this country, once he's gone from the stage and back to his basement, then it will be much easier to convince the American people that the vaccine was developed by and approved by scientists in this country.
Steve Cortes, Senior Advisor for the Trump 2020 campaign. Thanks for taking the time here today.